She didn't scream, she didn't cry. Elena Hartwell stood in the middle of a ballroom full of Chicago's most powerful people, reached up with both hands and tore the diamond necklace from her throat like it was a leash. The clasp bit into her skin. Blood threaded down her collarbone, and when the necklace hit that marble floor, $300,000 of diamonds scattering in every direction. Every conversation in that room died at once. Her husband, Marcus Voss, watched her from across the room with cold, patient eyes. He wasn't angry. That was the worst part. He wasn't even surprised. Like he'd been waiting for this moment all along. Like, comment your city below. Let me see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The ballroom at the Meridian Grand was the kind of place that made people feel small on purpose. Vaulted ceilings draped in ivory silk, chandeliers the size of compact cars, a string quartet buried somewhere near the East Wing, playing something forgettable and expensive, 400 guests in black tie and couture, the kind of crowd that kissed each other's cheeks and then said vicious things the moment backs turned. Politicians, CEOs, real estate developers, federal judges who'd been on someone's payroll for so long they'd forgotten what clean felt like. It was Marcus Voss's kind of room. He'd built it, essentially. Not the hotel, though he'd financed the renovation 3 years ago, but the crowd inside it. The architecture of influence, the carefully constructed web of favors owed and loyalties purchased. And standing in the center of it all, in a midnight blue gown that cost more than most people's monthly rent, was Elena Hartwell Voss, his wife of 7 years, his accessory, his prop. She didn't know that's what she was. Not yet. Not until 40 minutes into their 10th wedding anniversary party, when Marcus pulled her aside behind a column near the Champagne station and told her in a voice so quiet it barely registered over the string quartet. "I've been seeing someone," he said. He didn't look at her when he said it. He was watching the room over her shoulder, scanning for someone more important. "I have been for about 2 years. I wanted you to know before it becomes public." Elena's champagne flute went still in her hand. "Her name isn't relevant. What's relevant is that I've spoken to my attorneys this week. The terms are already drafted. You'll be comfortable. The Evanston house, a monthly allowance. I'm not unreasonable. But the Chicago properties stay with me, obviously. The portfolio, the accounts." He finally looked at her. His eyes were brown and flat, like two stones at the bottom of a dry creek. "You were always a temporary arrangement, Elena. I think some part of you knew that." She didn't say anything. Her throat had closed completely. "The announcement won't happen tonight," he continued. "I need you to hold yourself together for another 2 hours. Can you do that?" She thought about the 7 years, the dinners she'd hosted, the campaigns she'd quietly supported, the miscarriage she'd had alone in a hospital bathroom while Marcus was at a conference in Dubai, and told her it wasn't a good time to call. She thought about the way he corrected her in front of people, her grammar, her opinions, her laugh, the way he'd taken her world apart piece by piece and called it love. 2 hours, he repeated, like she hadn't heard him. And something in Elena Hartwell went very, very quiet. She set her champagne glass down on a passing server's tray with a steadiness that surprised her. She turned away from Marcus without answering. She walked through the crowd with her chin up, nodding at faces she recognized, and when she reached the center of the ballroom, the spot where the light was brightest and the crowd was thickest, she stopped. She reached up. She gripped the diamond necklace, Marcus's gift to her 5 years ago, the one he'd made her wear tonight specifically because it photographed well. And she pulled. The clasp tore skin. She felt the sting of it, the thin thread of warmth sliding down toward her collarbone. The necklace came apart in her hands, and then she opened her fingers and let it fall. It hit the marble like a sentence ending. The music stopped. The conversation stopped. 400 people turned to look at Elena Voss standing alone in the center of that enormous room, her collarbone bleeding through the neckline of her gown, her hands empty, her face absolutely still. Marcus, from 40 feet away, watched her with those flat brown eyes. Elena turned and walked out. The rain hit her the moment the doors opened. Late October in Chicago, which meant it wasn't just rain. It was the kind of cold, driving wet that got inside your clothes and stayed there. The hotel's doormen were already moving toward her with umbrellas and sympathetic faces, reaching for their earpieces. Someone calling someone. Elena didn't slow down. Her heels hit the slick sidewalk and she kept walking. She had no purse, no phone. She'd left it on the dressing table in the suite upstairs because Marcus had told her it looked cheap to carry a phone at an event like this. No coat, no keys. She had the gown on her back and shoes that cost $800 and were already destroying her feet on the wet concrete, and she kept walking anyway because stopping wasn't something her body would allow right now. The city swallowed her within 2 blocks. The Meridian Grand disappeared behind her. The lights of Michigan Avenue blurred in the rain. Headlights, street lamps, the neon of a late-night pharmacy. She walked past people huddled under awnings. A taxi splashed through a puddle near the curb and soaked the hem of her gown. She didn't register it. Temporary arrangement. 7 years. 7 years of learning to make herself smaller, of softening her opinions at dinner parties, of choosing her words carefully in the presence of Marcus's friends because he had a way of looking at her. A particular look, quick and cutting, gone before anyone else could catch it, that told her she'd said something wrong. 7 years of rearranging herself around the shape of a man who'd apparently already decided she had an expiration date. She walked for 12 blocks before her ankle buckled on a crack in the sidewalk, and she went down hard on one knee, catching herself on her palms against the wet concrete. For a moment she just stayed there, kneeling on the sidewalk in her ruined gown in the Chicago rain, blood on her palm and blood still drying on her collarbone, and she thought she might stay there forever. Then someone said, "Hey." Not aggressive, not concerned exactly, just present. She looked up. A man was crouching in front of her on the sidewalk, holding an umbrella at an angle that covered her without quite reaching him. He was somewhere in his early 40s, dark hair gone slightly gray at the temples, a jaw that looked like it had been broken at least once and healed crooked, a dark overcoat, good quality, the kind that didn't advertise itself. His eyes were a complicated color, somewhere between gray and green, and they were looking at her the way a person looks at something they recognize without being able to name it. "You want to stand up," he said, "or you want to stay down there a while?" It wasn't really a question, just 2 options, neutrally presented. Elena stared at him for a moment. "I don't know you." "No," he agreed. "Then why are you—" "I was in the cafe," he said, nodding behind her. She hadn't noticed a cafe. "Saw you go down. Figured I'd check." He didn't offer his hand. He just waited, like he had all night, and her decision about what to do with herself was genuinely hers to make. She got up on her own. Her knee was bleeding through the gown. She could feel it now, a hot, spreading ache. She straightened up and looked at him directly because that was the one thing Marcus had never managed to take from her, her ability to look a person straight in the eye. "I'm fine," she said. "Okay," he said. "I don't need anything." "Okay." She waited for him to say something else, to push, to insert himself, to offer help in a way that was really just another form of control. Marcus was very good at that. Offers that were really instructions. Generosity that was really debt. The man just closed the umbrella, folded it under his arm, and glanced up at the rain with a faint expression of mild inconvenience. "There's a diner half a block up," he said. "They have terrible coffee, and they'll leave you alone, just so you know it's there." Then he turned and walked back toward the cafe. Elena watched him go. The rain came back, heavier now, hitting her hair and her bare shoulders and the ruined silk of her gown. Half a block up, the diner sign glowed orange through the wet dark. She stood on the sidewalk for another 20 seconds, not making a decision, just breathing. Then she walked toward the diner. Oh, his name, she would learn later, was Dante Moretti. But that was later. Right now she was just a woman in a wrecked dress, sitting in a vinyl booth at 2 a.m, holding a mug of coffee that was, as advertised, terrible, watching rain run down the window glass and trying to figure out what her life was. She'd married Marcus at 27. She'd been a junior marketing director at a mid-sized firm, working 60-hour weeks, eating lunch at her desk, living in a rental in Wicker Park that she loved more than any place she'd lived since. Marcus had come into her firm as a client. He was developing a mixed-use property in River North and needed a campaign, and she'd been assigned to his account. She'd been good at her job. She'd pushed back on his initial concepts, presented alternatives, won the argument on 3 separate occasions. He'd liked that. He told her she was the first person in months who disagreed with him directly. She should have heard the warning in that. A man who was surprised someone disagreed with him wasn't a man you wanted to build a life around. But she'd been 27 and he'd been 42 and he'd been the most certain person she'd ever met. He had opinions about everything, and he stated them cleanly, and he never second-guessed himself out loud. And she had confused certainty with security. She had confused confidence with competence. She had confused a man who liked her backbone for a man who would respect it long term. He hadn't. The backbone was a novelty, like a curious feature on a property he was acquiring. Interesting during the appraisal, inconvenient once he owned the place. She turned the coffee mug in her hands. The ceramic was chipped at the rim. Somewhere in the kitchen, something dropped and someone laughed. The cook and the overnight waitress, probably, talking about their lives. Normal things. Lives that felt more real right now than anything Elena had inhabited in the past 7 years. She had no phone, no money, no coat. She had a bleeding knee and a bleeding neck, and a husband who just told her she was a temporary arrangement at a party, celebrating their decade together. She had an attorney somewhere, her own, separate from Marcus's constellation of lawyers, but she hadn't spoken to him in 2 years because Marcus had gently, persistently suggested she didn't need independent counsel for anything, that his people handled everything, that using her own lawyer was adversarial and created an atmosphere of distrust. She should have heard the warning in that too. The bell above the diner door rang. A man came in, shook rain from his coat, and sat down at the counter. Not the man from the sidewalk, just someone else. A night shift worker by the look of him, a thermos in one hand, ordering without looking at the menu. Elena looked at her reflection in the window. She barely recognized herself, not because of the wet hair or the ruined makeup or the mascara that had tracked down her face in the rain and dried there, but because of her eyes. They were very clear, frightened, yes, exhausted, but clear in a way they hadn't been in years, like something that had been pressing against the inside of her skull had finally, violently been released. She thought about Marcus in that ballroom, the way he'd watched her walk out. Not chasing, not angry, just watching. Patient and certain. The way he was patient and certain about everything, because he believed, had always believed, that no matter what happened, he would win. That the structure he'd built around their life was so complete, so thoroughly in his favor, that she had nowhere to go and no tools to fight with. Maybe he was right. Or maybe he'd spent 7 years so focused on controlling her that he had never stopped to notice whether she was actually controllable. The waitress came by to refill her coffee without being asked. Her name tag said Donna, and she was maybe 60 and had the look of a woman who'd seen 1,000 terrible nights walk through that door and made peace with all of them. Bad one? Donna said, nodding at Elena's general state. Yeah, Elena said. Anniversary or breakup? Elena almost laughed. Anniversary, technically, though it ended like a breakup. Donna clicked her tongue, refilled the mug. You need to call someone? I got a phone behind the counter. Elena thought about who she would call. Her father Raymond, who was 71 and lived alone in Oak Park and would drive through a hurricane for her, but would also be terrified, and she wasn't ready to terrify him tonight. Her college roommate Sandra, who lived in Seattle now and was 3 time zones away and had 3 kids and a life, and Elena hadn't actually talked to her in 8 months because Marcus had, subtly, consistently, over years, made it uncomfortable to maintain friendships that existed outside of his orbit. There was no one close. That was the truth she was sitting with right now, in this vinyl booth, in this fluorescent diner. Marcus had not ripped her life apart dramatically. He had done it gradually, incrementally, with patience and precision. One friendship allowed to drift. One family dinner made slightly uncomfortable until the invitations stopped. One interest quietly mocked until she abandoned it. It had taken years, and she hadn't felt it happening because each individual thing was so small, so reasonable, so easy to explain away. The aggregate was a woman who had no coat and no phone and nowhere to go at 2 a.m. and no one close enough to call. I'll figure it out, Elena told Donna. Donna looked at her for a moment, not with pity, which Elena couldn't have handled, but with something more like recognition. Then she went back to the counter. Elena wrapped both hands around the mug and stared at the rain. She didn't hear him approach. He moved quietly for a big man, and he was, she noticed now, genuinely large, not in a performative, muscle-bound way, but in the way of someone built for function rather than appearance. He stopped at the edge of her booth and she looked up. Dark overcoat, broken and healed jaw, those complicated gray-green eyes. "I didn't follow you in," he said, before she could say anything. "I was already here. I come in most nights." He nodded at the counter. "I'm usually over there. I can stay over there." "Or," Elena said, "he considered this. Or I could sit here. And you could not have to be alone in this booth at 2 a.m. looking like someone just pulled the floor out from under you. You don't know what happened to me." "No," he said, "I don't need to." There was something in his voice that she couldn't identify right away. It wasn't warmth exactly. It was something quieter than that. Something that didn't require anything from her, didn't lean, didn't push, just occupied space without asking her to manage it. She slid toward the window. "Sit down," she said, "but I don't want to talk about it." "Fine by me," he said, and sat. They sat in silence for a while. Donna brought him coffee without being asked. A regular, clearly. He drank it the same way Elena was drinking hers, both hands around the mug, looking out at the rain. "It's a city that looks better in weather," he said eventually, not really to her. "I've never liked Chicago when it's clear. Too flat. Too obvious." Elena looked at him sideways. "Where are you from originally?" "Brooklyn," he said. "Moved here when I was 19. "You miss it?" "Parts." He took a sip of coffee. "The food. Some of the people. Not the way everything felt like it was about to burn down." She almost smiled. Almost. "What do you do?" she asked. It was the kind of question you asked in Chicago. Here, people were their professions, their buildings, their portfolios. And the moment she asked it, she felt the reflex of it, the trained social script, and hated herself a little for defaulting to it. He looked at her with a slight shift in expression. Amused, maybe. Or something adjacent to amused. "Business," he said. "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "But it's what I've got right now." She let it go. The rain came down harder. Somewhere outside, a car horn went off in a long, frustrated blast and then fell silent. "I have nowhere to go," Elena said. She hadn't meant to say it out loud. It came out flat and factual, the way the worst truths often do. "I have no phone, no money, no coat. My husband is in a hotel 3 blocks from here, and my name is probably on his accounts, but I don't actually have access to any of them in a way that I could use tonight. My father's in Oak Park. She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I have nowhere to go." He looked at her, not at the bloody collarbone or the ruined makeup or the desperate woman tableau in the vinyl booth, just at her face, her eyes. "I have a car outside," he said, "and a building on the north side with a guest floor that nobody uses. You'd have your own elevator code, your own key, and I wouldn't come near the floor without an invitation." He picked up his coffee mug. "I'm not asking for anything. I'm not telling you it's safe because I'm a stranger, and that would be a stupid thing to say. I'm just telling you the option exists." "Why?" Elena said. He was quiet for a moment. "Outside rain, because someone should have given me an option once," he said. "And no one did." She looked at him for a long time, trying to read the danger in it, the angle, the hidden demand. That was what Marcus had done to her. Taught her that everything from a man had an angle, a price, a thing hidden under the offer. She searched Dante Moretti's face for the thing hidden under the offer. She didn't find it, which scared her almost as much as if she had. "What's your name?" she asked. "Dante." "Elena," she said. He nodded once, like they'd settled something minor. She thought about Marcus in the ballroom, the flat brown eyes. "You were always a temporary arrangement." She thought about the apartment in Wicker Park she'd given up 9 years ago, and the job she'd left, and the friendship she'd let dissolve, and all the small surrenders that had seemed so reasonable in the moment and had added up, without her noticing, to a life that wasn't hers. She thought about herself on her knees on a Chicago sidewalk in the rain. She thought about the woman in the diner window, frightened but clear-eyed. "Okay," she said. The building was on North Dearborn, 12 floors. The kind of older construction that had been maintained with enough money and enough care that it felt permanent. Dante said 3 words to the man at the front desk, who nodded without expression and handed Elena a key card without asking her name or looking at her state of dress. She appreciated the discretion more than she expected to. The elevator opened onto the 10th floor. Her floor, Dante had said. He stepped in just long enough to show her the code. 7421, punch it in, door opens, and then stepped back into the elevator before the doors closed. There's a phone in the kitchen, he said through the narrowing gap. A credit card in the top right drawer. Prepaid, not traceable. Doesn't matter what you spend. There's food. There's clothes in the secondary closet, various sizes. Don't ask. A beat. You can leave whenever you want. You don't owe me anything. The doors closed. Elena stood in a quiet hallway that smelled faintly of cedar and rain-damp concrete from the window at the far end. She stood there for a full 30 seconds, not moving. Then she went in. The apartment was large and spare. Good furniture, but minimal, like someone had started with more and gradually removed things that didn't earn their space. Large windows looking out over the dark, wet city. A kitchen with a counter made of poured concrete. Books arranged on shelves without apparent system. A biography of a labor organizer next to a thick hardcover on criminal law next to something in Italian Elena couldn't read the spine of. The clothes were exactly as described. A secondary closet in the main bedroom containing shirts, jeans, sweatshirts, a pair of sneakers in what might be her size. She stripped off the ruined gown without ceremony and left it on the bathroom floor. She stood in the shower for 11 minutes with hot water hitting the back of her neck, watching the mascara and the grime and the remnants of the anniversary party run down the drain. The cut at her collarbone stung. The knee was worse. She cleaned it out and found a first aid kit under the bathroom counter and wrapped it in the familiarity of the task. Something practical, something she could do with her own hands, steadied her a little. She put on jeans that were slightly large and a gray sweatshirt and found the kitchen. The prepaid card was in the drawer where he said it would be. $800 on it, she discovered when she checked the balance using the kitchen phone. She didn't know what to do with that information, so she set the card on the counter and made herself a piece of toast. There was bread in the cabinet, real bread, the kind that had actual weight to it, and stood at the kitchen window eating it, looking out at Chicago in the rain. She tried to think about what tomorrow looked like. She couldn't see it clearly yet. It was like trying to look through foggy glass, shapes and outlines, but no definition. She would need a phone. She would need to call her own attorney, the one she hadn't spoken to in 2 years, and she would need to figure out what her actual legal position was, what access she had to what assets, whether she'd been as systematically removed from financial independence as she suspected, or whether Marcus had gotten lazy somewhere and left a door open. She would need to call her father, not tonight. He would hear it in her voice in panic, but soon. She would need to understand what she was walking into, because Marcus wouldn't let this be quiet. She knew that with a certainty that sat in her stomach like a stone. She'd humiliated him in front of 400 people. She'd walked out of his carefully curated theater of power, and she'd done it in a way that was impossible to spin. There was no explanation for a woman ripping off her diamond necklace and walking out of her own anniversary party that made the husband look good. People had phones. There were already photos, probably videos. Marcus would retaliate. She didn't know how yet, but she knew he would, and she knew it would be organized and thorough and aimed at what mattered most to her. That was his style. He didn't attack directly. He attacked the things you loved. Elena looked down at her hands on the kitchen counter. The palms were still slightly abraded from the sidewalk fall. Small damages. Manageable. She thought about Dante Moretti, downstairs somewhere in this building, or not here at all. A man who had given her a key and a code and a prepaid credit card, and no explanation beyond the ghost of a story about someone who should have had options and didn't. She thought about the way he'd offered this, not as charity, not as rescue, but as a practical arrangement between two strangers who'd been in the same place at the same time, and one of whom had more resources than the other. She didn't understand him. But then, she'd thought she understood Marcus perfectly at 27, and she'd been catastrophically wrong, so perhaps her understanding of men needed some revision. The rain eased slightly. The city went quieter. She left the kitchen, went to the spare room, lay down on top of the covers in the dark with the glow of the wet city coming in through the curtains, and thought about everything she'd lost, and everything she'd lost that she hadn't even noticed was gone. She thought about the version of herself that had existed before Marcus, sharp, self-sufficient, living in Wicker Park, and arguing with clients and eating lunch at her desk, and staying up too late and making mistakes that were entirely her own. She tried to locate that woman. She was somewhere still, Deep, maybe, and quieter than she used to be, but present. You were always a temporary arrangement. Fine, Elena thought. Then I'll be a temporary arrangement that takes everything you built and turns it to ash. She didn't sleep for a long time. When she did, she dreamed of the necklace hitting the marble. The sound it made. Clean and final. Like a period at the end of a sentence she'd been writing for 7 years without meaning to. But Marcus Voss got home at 4 a.m. Not to the Meridian Grand Suite. He'd handed that off to his assistant with instructions about managing the guest fallout, but to the Lakeshore Drive penthouse, the real home. Elena had never been comfortable there. Too much glass, she'd said once. Too exposed. He'd taken that as confirmation that she lacked the confidence to inhabit significant spaces. He stood at the window in his shirt and loosened tie and looked out at the dark lake and thought about the necklace. That had been unexpected. Elena was not, in his experience, a dramatic person. She was cautious and measured and occasionally, particularly in the early years, genuinely impressive. The necklace had surprised him, not the emotion behind it. He'd anticipated some version of a scene, but the precision of it, the public spectacle, the way she'd done it at the exact worst moment, in the exact worst spot in the room, when the cameras were out and the crowd was densest. That had been tactical, whether she'd known it or not. He turned from the window and called his lead attorney. "She walked out," Marcus said when the man answered. "I want to know everything about her movements in the next 48 hours. I want a hold placed on the joint accounts as of this morning, and I want Brennan at the Tribune to get a call about a mental health episode at the Meridian." The attorney was quiet for a moment. "The mental health angle is a risk." "I know the risks," Marcus said. "Do it carefully. Background only at first, lay the groundwork. I want the story available if I need it." He looked at the lake. "And find her. Not to bring her back. Just so we know where she is." He hung up. He wasn't angry exactly. He was recalibrating. Marcus Voss did not do anger. Anger was a tool for people who had no other options. He had options. He always had options. Elena had made a move. Unexpected, ill-considered, and emotional. He would counter it methodically, as he countered everything. By the time this was over, she'd be grateful for his original terms. He was certain of that. He was wrong. By 6 o'clock that morning, someone had uploaded the video to Twitter. It was 43 seconds long. Shot on a phone from across the ballroom, slightly grainy, the angle imperfect. But you could see everything that mattered. You could see Elena's hands going to the necklace. You could see the tension of it, the violence of the gesture. Not reckless, but deliberate. You could see the necklace hit the marble and scatter. You could see her face, not hysterical, not destroyed, clear. And then walking out, spine straight, through the crowd that parted around her. The caption read, "Anniversary party went a little differently than planned. Mrs. Marcus Voss tonight." By 7, it had 60,000 views. By 9, it had 300,000. Marcus's phone started ringing at 7:15. His assistant fielded calls. 2 newspapers, 1 news channel, a former business associate who apparently thought this was funny, calling to offer commiserations in a tone that was mostly curiosity. Marcus read the comment sections with his morning coffee and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Uncertainty. People were not framing this as a wife having a breakdown. They were framing it as something else. Something he didn't have clean language for but could recognize as dangerous. They were framing Elena as a woman who'd had enough. They were using words like power and dignity and legendary in the comments and tagging friends with strings of fire emojis. Someone had already made a slow-motion edit set to a dramatic orchestral track. Someone else had turned the necklace hitting the floor moment into a GIF. Elena, in 43 seconds of phone video, had somehow become a symbol. Marcus set down his coffee cup, looked out at the lake, thought carefully. He had managed his public image for 30 years. He was very good at it. He could turn this. He would turn this. But something cold moved through him as he watched the view counter climb. He was going to need to move faster than he'd planned. Elena found the phone in the kitchen at 8:15 in the morning and looked at the video. She watched it twice. Then she set the phone down and sat at the concrete counter for a long moment, hands flat on the surface. Then she stood up, found the prepaid card in the drawer, and called her attorney. He answered on the second ring because it was a number he didn't recognize and said, "Hello?" "Richard," she said, It's Elena Hartwell. I need to see you today. A beat. Elena, Yes, of course. Are you all right? No, she said. But I'm going to be. What time can you meet? She heard him moving, flipping something, checking a calendar, the ordinary sounds of a life proceeding normally in the morning, and she felt the strangeness of that. The world going on as it always had while hers had broken open overnight. 10 o'clock, he said. 10 o'clock, she said. Don't use the office, somewhere neutral. I'll explain when I see you. She hung up. She sat with the quiet for a moment. Then she heard a knock at the apartment door. 3 knocks, measured, unhurried. She crossed the room and looked through the peephole. Dante Moretti stood in the hallway in a clean shirt, no tie, holding a paper bag that smelled, even through a closed door, like something worth eating. He wasn't looking at the peephole. He was looking at the floor, just waiting, like a man who fully expected to be told to go away and had decided that was fine. Elena opened the door. He looked up. Something in his expression, a tightness around the eyes maybe, or the way his jaw shifted, told her he'd seen the video. He hadn't expected her to open the door that fast. I brought food, he said. You don't have to let me in. She stepped back from the doorway. Come in, she said. We need to talk. She wasn't sure what she knew yet, or what he knew, or what any of it meant. But she was done waiting to find things out. She was done being careful in the wrong directions. Whatever came next, whatever Marcus was already building against her, whatever shape the counterattack was going to take, she was going to need to understand everything she was walking into. Starting with the man standing in her doorway with a paper bag and complicated eyes who had, for reasons she didn't yet understand, decided to be in her corner. She needed to understand Dante Moretti. And something told her, with the quiet certainty of a person who has finally stopped lying to themselves, that understanding him was going to change everything. Ian. The paper bag contained 2 breakfast sandwiches, a container of cut fruit that neither of them would touch, and 2 black coffees in cups that were already sweating through the cardboard sleeves. Dante set it on the concrete counter and didn't move further into the apartment than that. Stayed near the kitchen island, giving her the room, giving her the distance to decide how close she wanted him. Elena pulled out one of the coffees and leaned against the opposite counter with her arms crossed. Not hostile, just measuring. You saw it, she said. Yeah. How bad is it? He picked up the second coffee. Depends on who you're asking. For you, right now, this morning, people are on your side. The video reads the way it reads. Woman at her breaking point does something real in a room full of fake. He paused. For Marcus, it's a problem he didn't plan for, which means he's already working on making it your problem instead. She looked at him. You know who he is. I know who he is. How? He took a drink of coffee and set the cup down and looked at her directly. That's a longer conversation. We're having it now, Elena said. You show up at my door with breakfast the morning after you found me on the sidewalk. You have a building with a guest floor no one uses and a prepaid card in a drawer, and you know who my husband is. She kept her voice level. Who are you? The kitchen was quiet. Outside, Chicago was waking up. Distant traffic, a siren somewhere. The particular urban hum of a city that never actually went to sleep. Dante Moretti, he said. I run a business, several businesses. Some of them are the kind that operate in spaces the law doesn't fully reach. He watched her face. I'm not going to dress it up or make it sound cleaner than it is. You're saying you're a criminal. I'm saying I operate outside certain lines that the government draws. Whether that makes me a criminal depends on which government and which lines you're talking about. A beat. I know that's not a satisfying answer. It's not, Elena said. Keep going. He was quiet for a moment, like he was deciding how much of the map to show her. Marcus Voss has been on my radar for about 14 months. He's not just a real estate developer. He has contracts with city officials that shouldn't exist. He has money moving through shell accounts that's been laundered through 3 different jurisdictions. He has a judge in Cook County in his pocket and 2 aldermen and a deputy commissioner in the building department. He picked up the coffee again. He's been careful, but careful people still make tracks. I've been following the tracks. Elena stood very still. Why? What does Marcus have to do with your business? One of the shell accounts traces back to a development in the South Side, property that was supposed to be low-income housing. The funding got redirected. Families lost units. Some of them were people I look out for. His jaw tightened slightly. Marcus Voss stole from people who had nothing to steal and used their neighborhood as a pass-through for dirty money. That's why. She looked at him for a long time. Outside, the siren faded. "So I'm useful to you," she said flatly. He didn't flinch. "You could be. That doesn't mean that's why I'm here." "Then why are you here?" "Because you were on the sidewalk in the rain," he said. "And that's a separate thing from the rest of it. I need you to understand that those are two separate things." She didn't know if she believed him, but she noted that he hadn't tried to collapse the two things together, hadn't tried to sell her the rescue and the strategic value as one package. That was either genuine or very sophisticated manipulation, and she was too tired and too raw to determine which. "I have an attorney meeting at 10, she said. "Good. I'm going to need a phone, a real one. I'll have one here in an hour. And I need clothes that actually fit." He nodded. "Give me sizes. I also need you to tell me everything you have on Marcus." She uncrossed her arms and set both palms on the counter. "Not because I'm working with you, not yet, but because I need to know what I'm walking into, and right now you know more than I do, and that's a position I'm not willing to stay in." Dante looked at her. Something shifted in those gray-green eyes. Not quite respect, but something in the neighborhood of it. Recognition, maybe. Like he'd been expecting her to ask for something lesser. "After your attorney meeting," he said, "come back here. I'll have someone here who you should talk to." "Who?" "Her name is Vivian Cross. She's an attorney, the kind that doesn't lose." Richard Paulson had been Elena's attorney for 12 years, from back before Marcus, from back when she'd needed a contract reviewed for a freelance consulting deal, and someone had given her his card. He was 63, short, wore suits that were always slightly too big, and had a face like a worried basset hound that concealed, Elena had always known, a mind like a steel trap. She'd called him from a number he didn't recognize, and he'd met her at a coffee shop in Lincoln Park, with a legal pad and 2 pens, and the look of a man who had seen some things but was still capable of being surprised. He was surprised. She told him everything, the party, the necklace, the night at the diner. She left out Dante Moretti, because that was a complication she wasn't ready to introduce yet. By the time she finished, Richard had filled half the legal pad and his coffee had gone cold. "The joint accounts," he said. "You said you couldn't access them last night." "I tried from the hotel phone before I left. My passcode had been changed." Richard wrote something down. "He moved fast." "That's either panic or preparation." He tapped the pen on the pad. "My instinct is preparation. Marcus Voss doesn't panic." "No," Elena said. "He doesn't." So he was planning this exit before last night. The announcement at the party, he'd already begun positioning, the account access. Richard looked up. "Elena, I want to ask you something, and I want you to think before you answer. In the last 2 years, have you signed any documents that Marcus presented to you? Anything that seemed routine? Revisions to existing agreements? Investment documents? Anything he framed as administrative?" She thought about it. The habit of trust, or the habit of compliance, she was understanding now that those were different things, made this question harder to answer than it should have been. 2 years. Marcus handing her things to sign at dinner, on weekends, before trips. Documents he described briefly and she'd signed because she was tired of asking questions that made him impatient, and because she'd believed, in the way that people believe things they want to be true, that a man she'd married would not weaponize paperwork against her. "Yes," she said. "Several things. I don't know what they were." Richard's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. "Okay, I'm going to need a list of everything you can remember. Dates, if possible, circumstances. We'll cross-reference against what we can pull." He made another note. "The social media situation. Have you seen the video?" "Yes." "It's at roughly 800,000 views as of this morning. I want to counsel you not to post anything, say anything publicly, or respond to any journalist." He paused. "But I also want to say, the way that video reads, the public perception is currently favorable to you. Marcus will work to change that. He'll have people working on it right now. The question is how and how fast." As if the universe had been listening and wanted to answer that question directly, Elena's borrowed phone buzzed on the table. It was a notification from a news app. She'd set one up that morning for Marcus Voss alerts. Real estate developer Marcus Voss expresses concern for wife Elena following health episode at anniversary event. Sources close to the couple say Mrs. Voss has been experiencing significant emotional distress in recent months. Mr. Voss asks for privacy for his family during this difficult time. She turned the phone face up and slid it across the table to Richard. He read it. His expression went very still in the way of someone controlling a reaction. "There it is," he said. "Mental health," Elena said. Her voice was flat. "Character degradation first, sympathy play for him second." Richard slid the phone back. "It's a standard playbook, but he's running it fast, which tells me he's worried about the window closing." "He's going to bury me," Elena said. "Not a question." "He's going to try." Richard picked up his pen again. "But he only buries you if you let him control the narrative. You have something he doesn't." "What?" "You have the truth." He looked at her steadily. "That sounds simple. It never is. But the truth, systematically documented, presented through the right channels, is something that money can complicate but can't fully destroy." He paused. "Are there other people? Former employees, business associates, anyone Marcus might have treated the way he treated you? Anyone who might be willing to speak?" Elena thought about it. Names floated up. A former executive assistant who'd left abruptly 2 years ago. A business partner from Marcus's early years who'd gone quiet after what Marcus had described vaguely as a professional disagreement. A woman at a charity gala 2 years back who'd looked at Marcus with an expression Elena hadn't understood at the time. "Maybe," she said. "I'd have to find them." "Start thinking," Richard said. "And Elena, whatever you do in the next 72 hours, don't be alone. Don't go anywhere alone. Don't talk to anyone from his circle alone. Don't sign anything." She thought of Dante Moretti upstairs in that building on North Dearborn and felt the complicated weight of that arrangement. "I'm not alone," she said. Vivian Cross was not what Elena expected. She'd expected someone in armor, polished, contained, the legal equivalent of a sheathed blade. What she got was a woman, about 40 years old, who arrived in jeans and a leather jacket and immediately walked to the window and looked out at the street below like she was checking sight lines. Short natural hair, a scar on the left side of her jaw that she wore without concealment, and eyes that moved with the rapid precision of someone whose brain was running 4 conversations ahead of her mouth at all times. "Elena Hartwell," Vivian said, turning from the window. "I've been reading the Marcus Voss file for 8 hours. I haven't slept. I have opinions." "Vivian," Dante said from the kitchen doorway. It wasn't a warning, just a pacing cue. "I'm pacing myself," Vivian said, which was clearly a lie. She dropped a tablet on the coffee table and sat across from Elena without preamble. "Okay, here's what I see. 7 years of systematic financial isolation. You have no independent accounts that are actually liquid. Everything's tied to joint structures he controls or can freeze. Your name appears on documents giving him broad management authority over shared assets, which I strongly suspect you signed without understanding what you were signing. There are 3 separate instances I've found in public records where your personal credit was used to secure his business ventures, which means his liability exposure bleeds into yours." Elena sat very still. "Additionally," Vivian continued, "I've identified at least 2 former employees of Voss Developments who filed workplace complaints in the last 4 years that were quietly settled and sealed. I want to talk to those people. I also want to talk to a woman named Patricia Hale, who was Marcus's personal assistant for 6 years before she left suddenly in 2021. No public statement, no LinkedIn update, just gone." Vivian looked at her directly. "Do you know her?" "I met her. I didn't know her." "He kept you separate from his professional life?" "He kept me separate from most things," Elena said. It came out more tired than bitter. "He framed it as protection, said his business was complicated and stressful and he didn't want me carrying that weight." She heard the explanation come out of her own mouth and heard, maybe for the first time with real clarity, how it had worked. The warmth of it, the apparent consideration. "I don't want you carrying that weight, a man taking burdens off you." or a man making sure you never developed the muscle to carry them. I understand now what that actually was. Vivian's expression didn't shift toward pity. She just nodded, clinical and direct. It's a documented pattern in financial abuse cases. Benevolent framing of control. We can work with that. She tapped the tablet. What I need from you is a full timeline. Everything you remember, every document you signed, every account you had access to that was later restricted, every instance where your name was used in his business without your full understanding. Can you do that? Yes. It'll be uncomfortable. Yes, Elena said again. Good. Vivian leaned back. Now, the harder conversation. Dante came in from the kitchen and sat in the chair near the window. He didn't say anything. Vivian glanced at him briefly, then back at Elena. Marcus is already working the mental health angle with the press, Vivian said. That's the first salvo. It's designed to preemptively discredit your testimony. Make anything you say later seem like the product of an unstable mind. It's ugly, and it's effective when it works. She paused. To counter it, we need your own public statement. Not emotional, not defensive, calm, factual. Something that reads as the statement of a woman who is fully in control of herself and her faculties and is choosing to speak, not reacting. Another pause. Are you ready to speak? What does that mean exactly? Elena said. It means we call a press conference in the next 48 hours before his narrative fully sets. You make a statement, limited, controlled, that establishes you as present, coherent, and standing on firm ground. You don't say anything about the legal case. You don't attack. You just appear in public and speak in complete sentences and let the world see that you're not what he says you are. Vivian looked at her steadily. I know it's fast. I know you're exhausted. But fast is the only speed that works here. Elena looked at the tablet on the coffee table, at the documents Vivian had assembled in 8 sleepless hours, the shape of her own imprisonment rendered in legal records and financial structures and sealed complaints. She thought about the comment section under the video. Power, dignity, legendary. A woman she'd never been able to see in herself, somehow visible to strangers in 43 seconds. She thought about Marcus at that window on Lakeshore Drive, certain he could turn this, certain she had nowhere to go and no tools to fight with. Set it up, Elena said. The press conference was at a hotel on Michigan Avenue, neutral ground, Vivian's choice, not too close to anything Marcus controlled. 48 journalists, 3 cameras from local news affiliates, a cluster of phones at the back of the room from people whose journalism lived on social media and sometimes mattered more. Elena wore gray, her own choice. Not the midnight blue of the anniversary party, not black. Gray. The color of something that hadn't decided yet, something in between, something neither defeated nor triumphant. She'd thought about it for 20 minutes standing in front of the spare room closet and had surprised herself by having a reason. She stood at the podium and looked at the room. There was a beat. 2 seconds. 3. Where the noise of the room dropped to near silence, and everyone waited, and Elena felt the weight of what she was about to do settle on her shoulders like something physical, not crushing, just real. She spoke. My name is Elena Hartwell. I was married to Marcus Voss for 7 years. I want to address the characterization of my mental health that has appeared in recent press reports attributed to sources close to Marcus. She kept her voice even. Those characterizations are false. I am well. I am thinking clearly. And I am choosing, of my own volition, to no longer be silent about the circumstances of my marriage. She looked at the cameras. I have retained legal counsel. I have documentation. And I intend to let the facts speak for themselves in the appropriate venue. She paused. I'd ask that the press apply the same scrutiny to Marcus Voss that they have applied to the 43-second video of me at a party. What drove a woman to that point is a longer story. I look forward to telling it. She stepped back from the podium, didn't take questions. Vivian had been clear on that. The room erupted. Marcus Voss watched the press conference on his laptop in the Lakeshore Drive penthouse with his attorney on speakerphone and his second coffee going cold beside him. She coached that, the attorney said. Every word. Obviously, Marcus said. She has help. That's not a woman who walked out of a hotel and figured this out alone overnight. Someone set this up, someone with resources. Marcus was quiet. On the screen, Elena stepped back from the podium. Her face was controlled and clear and not what he'd expected. I intend to let the facts speak for themselves. He played it back, watched her eyes. 7 years he'd been married to this woman, and he was realizing, with a coldness that was entirely separate from whatever he might have felt once for her, that he had not been paying attention to the right things. He'd been watching her compliance. He hadn't been watching what was underneath it. "Find out who's helping her," he said. "I want a name." "Already working on it." "And the father," Marcus said it quietly, without emphasis. "Raymond Hartwell, Oak Park. Find out what he has outstanding. Business, legal, financial, anything I can use." The attorney paused. "Marcus, using the family is a significant—" "Find out what he has outstanding," Marcus repeated. A long pause. Then, "Understood." Marcus closed the laptop, looked at the lake. Gray morning, flat water, the kind of sky that promised nothing. She had documentation, she had legal counsel, she had someone behind her with enough resources to move in 48 hours. And she'd just stood in front of 40 reporters, looking like the most coherent person in the city, and invited scrutiny. He felt it then. The thing he almost never felt. Not anger, not uncertainty, fear. Small, cold, precise. He put it away immediately, locked it somewhere it couldn't interfere with calculation. But he felt it. That night, Elena stood at the window of the 10th floor apartment and watched the city. Her phone, real now, fully set up, Vivian's number already in it, lay on the counter behind her. She'd gotten 3 calls from journalists she didn't answer, 1 voicemail from a woman she didn't recognize who said, "I know what Marcus did and I want to talk," and 1 text from a number she'd blocked 2 years ago on Marcus's suggestion that turned out to be Sandra's, her college roommate, saying only, "I saw. I'm here. Call me when you're ready." She hadn't cried yet. She thought maybe the crying was coming later when the adrenaline finally metabolized. Right now, she just felt thin and wired, and very, very awake. Dante appeared in the kitchen doorway behind her. She heard him before she saw him. The slight shift of air, the particular quiet of the way he moved. "The woman who left the voicemail," Elena said, without turning. "Patricia Hale." "Maybe," he said. "Vivian's already trying to reach her through a back channel." Elena turned. "The South Side housing development, the families you mentioned, the ones Marcus stole from, are they still there?" Dante looked at her carefully. "Some of them. I want to meet them." He was quiet for a moment. "Why?" "Because I want to understand what he actually is, not just what he did to me. What he is." She looked at him steadily. "You've been building something against him for 14 months. I've been living inside his operation for 7 years. Between us, that's a significant amount of information." Dante's expression shifted. That same thing as before. Recognition. Like she kept showing him a version of herself he hadn't quite anticipated. "I should tell you something," he said. His voice changed. Not soft. Dante Moretti's voice was never soft, but weighted differently, like something coming up from deeper. "I ran an operation 3 years ago," he said. "A man in Milwaukee. Similar to Marcus. Legitimate surface, criminal infrastructure underneath. I'd been building the case for 8 months. I had everything I needed." He stopped. "There was a woman, his wife. She'd reached out through channels, said she wanted out, said she had information." He looked at the window, not at her. "I moved too slow. I kept her in place too long because her access was useful. By the time I got her out, she'd been in the hospital twice." The room was very quiet. "I'm telling you this," he said, "because I don't want to make the same calculation with you. You're not a resource. You're a person, and if at any point this stops being something you choose and starts being something you're trapped in, I need you to tell me." Elena looked at him for a long time, at the broken and healed jaw, at the weight in those gray-green eyes that she now understood was something specific. Not just age or experience, but the particular gravity of a mistake that got paid for and couldn't be unpaid. "I'll tell you," she said. He nodded. "But I'm not stopping," she said. "I know," he said. "That's why I'm still here." And then Elena's phone went off. Not a call, an alert. She crossed to the counter and picked it up and read the notification and felt the blood leave her face in a single cold rush. The headline read, "Raymond Hartwell, father of Elena Hartwell Voss, arrested on charges of financial fraud and tax evasion. Federal investigators allege a pattern of—" She didn't finish reading it. She looked up at Dante. He'd already seen it on his own phone. His expression had gone very still. The particular stillness of someone who recognizes a move on a chessboard and understands what it means. "He went after my father," she said. Her voice was strange, not loud, not breaking. Something in it had changed, a temperature change, something dropping to a level below where fear operates, into something older and harder and less negotiable. Dante didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "This changes what we're doing." "Yes," Elena said. "It does." She set the phone down on the counter, carefully, like setting down something that might detonate if handled wrong. "He just made this a different war," she said. And somewhere across the city, in the penthouse on Lakeshore Drive, Marcus Voss looked at his own phone and allowed himself a small, cold smile. He thought he'd just broken her. He had no idea what he'd just unlocked. The drive to Oak Park took 22 minutes. Elena didn't remember most of it. She sat in the passenger seat of Dante's car, black, quiet, the kind of vehicle that didn't announce itself, and stared at the highway lights coming through the windshield in long, pale streaks and tried to keep her breathing even. Dante drove without speaking. He'd grabbed his coat and his keys the moment she'd said, "I need to go to him," and hadn't asked a single question, which was either the most considerate thing anyone had done for her in years, or a sign that he understood the situation well enough to know questions were useless right now. Her father had not been arrested yet. That was what the second alert told her, reading more carefully on the drive. Charges filed. Arrest expected imminently. Federal investigators. Tax evasion. Financial fraud. A pattern of falsified records allegedly spanning 4 years. Raymond Hartwell was 71 years old. He had a bad hip and a vegetable garden in his backyard, and he called Elena every Sunday at 10 in the morning without fail, rain or shine, had done it for 30 years, had done it through Marcus's marriage, and through the miscarriage Elena had never told him about, and through every quiet erosion of her life. Those Sunday calls, the one consistent line of warmth in an existence that had grown progressively colder. He ran a small accounting firm, had run it for 40 years, the same office on Harrison Street, the same 3 employees, modest and steady and clean in the way that people are clean when they genuinely don't want anything they haven't earned. There was no version of Raymond Hartwell that committed financial fraud, which meant Marcus had manufactured it. The house was dark when they pulled up, except for the kitchen window, which glowed yellow and familiar in the way that had meant home to Elena since childhood. She was out of the car before Dante fully stopped. Up the front walk. Through the unlocked door. Her father never locked it before midnight, a habit she'd argued with him about for 15 years. Raymond Hartwell was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold in front of him, and 2 men in suits standing near the counter with the patient, impersonal posture of people who got paid to wait. He looked up when Elena came in, and his face did several things at once: relief and fear and confusion and love. All of it compressed into the expression of a man who was trying very hard not to look as frightened as he was. "Ellie," he said. "Dad?" She crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and put both hands on his shoulders and looked at him. His face was gray. He'd been crying recently. She could see the dried tracks of it, the redness around his eyes. And he'd straightened up when she came in, trying to compose himself, trying to be her father rather than a scared old man. One of the suited men cleared his throat. "Ms. Hartwell, we've advised your father not to—" "I'm not talking to you," Elena said without looking at him. She looked at her father. "Did you call your attorney?" "He's coming. He said an hour." "Did you say anything to them before he got here?" Raymond hesitated. "I answered some questions." "Dad." She kept her voice controlled, but barely. "You stop answering questions right now. Nothing more. Not a single word until your attorney is sitting next to you." She looked at the suited men then, deliberately and without warmth. "You have the right to wait in another room. I'd suggest you use it." The men exchanged a look. Then, with the mild affront of people accustomed to more deference, they moved to the living room. Elena sat down across from her father. Raymond Hartwell looked at her hands on the table. She'd gripped the edge without realizing it, and then at her face. "What did you do?" he said quietly. Not accusing, just asking, the way a parent asks when they're trying to understand the shape of something. "I left Marcus," she said. He nodded slowly. I saw the video. I'm sorry you had to see it that way. I'm not. He picked up the tea, realized it was cold, set it back down. I've been waiting for that moment for 4 years, maybe longer. His voice was steady, but something around his eyes was not. What's happening, Ellie? These men came to my door at 8 o'clock this morning. They had documents. They were showing me records from my firm, transactions I've never seen, accounts I don't recognize. I know. Those records aren't mine. I know, Dad. Someone put them there. He looked at her. Someone with enough access and enough... He stopped. His jaw went tight. He was 71, but he was sharp. Had always been sharp, and she could see him arriving at the answer in real time, and she watched the grief of it move across his face like weather. Marcus. Yes. Raymond was quiet for a long moment. Outside, somewhere on the street, a car passed. The kitchen clock ticked. The familiar sounds of her father's house, unchanged for 30 years, now wrapped around something terrible. He built a case against me, Raymond said. It wasn't a question. To make me stop, Elena said. Or to punish me for starting. Both, probably. Her father looked at his hands on the table. Old hands, ink-stained at the knuckles from a lifetime of working with paper and numbers. Honest hands. She felt something move through her that wasn't grief and wasn't anger. It was below both of those, something foundational and cold that had to do with the specific obscenity of watching a predator reach past you to hurt the person you love most. I'm going to fix this, she said. Elena, I'm going to fix it, she said again, and her voice didn't waver. You did not do this. The evidence is fabricated, and we are going to prove that. Vivian Cross, she's the attorney helping me. She's already working, and she's very good. But I need you to do exactly what I said. Nothing to those men. Nothing to anyone. Your lawyer only. Raymond looked at her. The grief was still there, but underneath it, something else had come up. Something that looked, unexpectedly, like pride. You have a plan, he said. I'm building one. This man who's helping you. Raymond nodded toward the front of the house, where Dante had presumably stayed with the car. Who is he? Someone who wants Marcus stopped for his own reasons, Elena said. And right now, that's enough. Her father was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded once. A decision being made, a trust being extended, the specific compact of a parent choosing to let a child they love walk into danger because they've looked at that child's face and understood that stopping them is no longer possible. Okay, he said. She squeezed his hands and stood up. Vivian was already on the phone when Elena got back to the North Dearborn apartment. She had her laptop open on the coffee table, 2 legal pads covered in handwriting beside it, and the look of someone who had hit a wall and was going through it rather than around it. The records they showed Raymond are good, Vivian said, the moment Elena walked in. No preamble. And I mean that in the worst possible way. They're not sloppy fakes. Someone spent real time on them. The account structures are plausible. The transaction histories are internally consistent. The digital signatures have been spoofed at a level that required access to actual firm software. She looked up. This wasn't built in 2 days. This was built before last night, before the party. Elena stood in the middle of the room. He was planning this before the party. Before the party, Vivian confirmed. The Raymond file is insurance. Maybe it was always going to be deployed at some point. Maybe it was specifically designed for a moment when you stepped out of line. She turned the laptop to face Elena. Look at the metadata on the file. Creation date. Elena looked at the screen. 6 months ago. 6 months ago. Marcus had been building a criminal case against her father for 6 months while coming home to their shared apartment, while sitting across from her at dinner, while looking at her with those flat brown eyes and saying the ordinary things that people say to the people they're supposed to love. She sat down on the couch. Not because she needed to, her legs were steady, but because she needed to think, and the room felt very large suddenly. There's more, Vivian said. Elena looked at her. Vivian set the laptop down, picked up one of the legal pads. I found Patricia Hale. And? She talked to me for 2 hours this afternoon. Vivian's voice was carefully measured, the tone of someone delivering information that they know is going to hurt, and have decided the only kindness is precision. She was Marcus's assistant for 6 years. She left in 2021 because Marcus sexually harassed her over an extended period, and when she threatened to report it, he used legal mechanisms to silence her. An NDA backed by a financial settlement that she signed under significant duress. A pause. She is not the only one. There are 2 other women she knows of, possibly more. The room was very quiet. Elena had known something, she realized. Not this specifically, but something. There had been moments, a look Marcus gave someone, a particular absence of concern for certain people, the ease with which he discarded things that were no longer useful to him. She had not named it to herself clearly. That was its own kind of damage, the willful fogging of things you suspect but can't bear to know. He's been doing this for years, Elena said. Yes, to women who had less power than me. Some of them had no power at all, Vivian said quietly. Assistants, employees, contracted workers. People he knew couldn't fight back. Elena was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Are they willing to speak?" Patricia is. She's been waiting for someone to move first. The others, I don't know yet. It takes time. People are scared. Vivian paused. But here's the problem. Here's what I need you to sit with tonight. Elena waited. Marcus knows we talked to Patricia. Vivian set the legal pad down. I don't know how. Either he has someone watching her, someone watching me, or someone in my network who's leaking. She said it without drama, just as fact. I started getting calls this afternoon from journalists. Not about you, about me. Someone is feeding them a story about a case I handled 8 years ago, a client who later faced criminal charges. They're framing it as misconduct. It's not. The case was clean, but it's going to create noise and it's designed to discredit me before I can fully build yours. Elena looked at her. He's coming after you too. He's coming after everything connected to you. Vivian's voice was level. That's how he operates. He doesn't fight one battle. He opens every front simultaneously and bets that his opponents run out of resources before he does. She paused. He has more money, more connections, more infrastructure than we do. In a long attrition war, he probably wins. So we don't fight a long war, Elena said. No, we find the thing that ends it fast. Vivian looked at her. Dante's evidence, the financial records, the shell accounts, the Southside development. How solid is it? Ask him, Elena said. He's in the kitchen. Dante came in without being called. He'd heard it. The walls weren't thick enough to pretend otherwise. He sat in the chair by the window and looked at Vivian directly. 14 months, he said. Financial forensics through 3 shell structures. Testimony from 2 former business partners who are willing to cooperate. Bank records showing cash transfers to the alderman. Documentation on the Southside property. He paused. It's solid, but it's not in a form that can go directly to federal prosecutors without creating questions about how it was obtained. How was it obtained? Vivian said. Carefully, Dante said. That's not an answer. It's the answer I have right now. Vivian looked at him for a long moment, the look of a lawyer evaluating exactly how much of a problem something was going to be. We need it clean, or we need it to lead to something clean. A tip that triggers a legitimate investigation that finds the same things through proper channels. She tapped her pen on the legal pad. Can you do that? I can try, Dante said. I have a contact at the federal level. It's been dormant for 2 years, but I can try. He looked at Elena. It'll take a few days? We don't have a few days, Elena said. My father's attorney can slow the process but not stop it. If those charges formalize, if he's actually arrested and processed. She stopped, pressed her fingers to her mouth for a moment, not against tears but against the raw, functional anger of it. It'll destroy him, not the legal outcome. Eventually we'd fight that. But the public nature of it, the arrest, the photographs. He's 71, and he spent 40 years building an honest reputation, and Marcus is going to put him in handcuffs in front of his neighbors. The room held that for a moment. Then Vivian said, "There's something else." And her voice had changed, something reluctant in it, something she'd clearly been deciding whether to say. Elena looked at her. "Tell me." Vivian opened the laptop again, pulled up a document, slid it across the coffee table. Elena picked it up. It was a dossier, 40 pages, dense, professional, her name on the cover, and her father's name, and photographs at her various locations, various times, some recent, some from years ago, and documents, not just the fabricated financial records for Raymond, but other things, private things, medical records from the miscarriage, therapy notes from a therapist Elena had seen for 4 months in 2019 and stopped seeing because Marcus had suggested, gently and persistently, that she didn't need it. Private correspondence. A letter she'd written to Sandra 3 years ago that she'd never sent, found in a draft folder in an email account she'd forgotten about. Someone had given Marcus everything, not just publicly available information, everything private. Elena turned the pages slowly. Her hands were steady. She noted that about herself, the steadiness, the way a person notes weather, informational, not meaningful. Steadiness right now was just the body protecting itself. It didn't mean she was okay. "Where did you get this?" she said. "It was sent to me anonymously this afternoon," Vivian said. "No source, no explanation, just the file." She paused. "Marcus has been surveilling you, probably for years, and someone in his operation leaked this to me. I don't know why. Maybe they're scared. Maybe they want out. Maybe they're playing a longer game." Elena looked at the therapy notes, her own handwriting on one page. She'd written things down because the therapist had suggested it, and she'd been trying, in 2019, to actually try. She'd written about the miscarriage, about the way Marcus had responded to it, or rather, hadn't responded to it, the particular flatness of him in the face of her grief. She'd written about feeling like she'd been erased. She'd been trying to understand what was happening to her life, and Marcus had gotten hold of that document and put it in a dossier. She closed the folder. "He's going to use this in court," she said, "the therapy notes, the medical records. He'll use them to support the mental health narrative, make them look like evidence of instability rather than documentation of his abuse." "Yes," Vivian said, "that's exactly what he'll do." "Can we stop him?" "Some of it. Medical records obtained illegally are suppressible, but he has smart lawyers and they'll find ways around suppression or find other routes to the same destination." Vivian looked at her carefully. "Elena, I want to ask you something that I need an honest answer to." "Ask. Is there anything in here," she gestured at the dossier, "that he can genuinely use to destroy you? Not fabricated, not manipulated. Something real that a jury or a judge or the public would look at and decide changes the picture." Elena sat with the question. It was the right question. It was the brutal, necessary question that a good attorney asks because the worst time to find the answer is after you've committed to a course of action. She thought about 7 years, about who she'd been and what she'd done and what she'd failed to do, about the small dishonesties of a difficult marriage, the things she'd told herself to keep functioning, the moments she'd looked away. Nothing criminal, nothing that reversed the nature of what Marcus had done to her, but things that in the wrong light, framed by the wrong narrative, could be made to look like something. "There's one thing," she said. Vivian waited. 2 years ago, Elena said, Marcus asked me to sign a document. I asked what it was, and he said it was a restructuring of one of the development entities, standard administrative process. I signed it." She paused. "I looked it up 3 months later when I found a copy in his files by accident. It was a document transferring beneficial interest in a property to a shell company. I didn't understand all of it. I didn't say anything because—" She stopped, and that pause cost her something. "Because I told myself I'd misread it. Because confronting it meant confronting everything." Vivian's expression didn't change, but her pen had stopped moving. "He can argue I was complicit," Elena said, "that I knowingly signed a document facilitating a fraudulent transfer." "Were you knowing?" Vivian said. "No." "Can you prove you weren't knowing?" "I don't know." Vivian wrote something on the legal pad. Long pause. The pen moving steadily. "Okay," Vivian said finally. "Okay. That's manageable. Potentially. It depends on what the document shows and whether we can establish a pattern of him using your signature without informed consent." She stopped. Her phone went off. She looked at it. Her face went still. She looked up at Elena, and the expression on her face was one Elena had never seen on Vivian Cross before. Not in 2 days, not through any of it. Not the Raymond files or the Patricia Hale conversation or the dossier. This was different. What? Elena said. Vivian turned the phone around. It was a text from a number Vivian didn't recognize. 4 words and an attachment. The 4 words were, "He knows about Dante." Elena looked at the attachment. A photograph. Grainy, telephoto, taken from some distance, but clear enough. Elena and Dante outside the North Dearborn building 2 nights ago. Her in the borrowed sweatshirt and jeans, him with his hand briefly on her arm. Not intimate, just steadying, the moment she'd stumbled coming down the front steps in the dark. It looked intimate in the photograph. The angle made it look intimate. That alone would have been manageable. But the photograph had a caption beneath it, typed in the same message thread. 3 sentences. Dante Moretti, known organized crime figure. Federal investigation open since 2022. Elena looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at Dante. He had gone very still in the chair by the window. He was looking at the phone in Vivian's hand, and his jaw was set, and he had the expression of a man who has just watched a door close that he'd been trying to keep open. "Tell me," Elena said, "what you weren't telling me." He didn't look away. That, at least. "The federal investigation. It's real. I knew about it." A pause. "I've been managing it, keeping my operations clean enough that there's nothing to actually charge. But it means there's a file on me. A file that Marcus can access through his judge in Cook County. And if Marcus uses that file, he connects you to me publicly," Dante said. "A woman claiming to be a victim of her powerful, corrupt husband is revealed to be sheltered by and operating with a known organized crime figure. The victim narrative flips. You become the person with criminal associations. He becomes the husband who is trying to manage a wife with dangerous connections." His voice was very level. "Everything you've built in the last 48 hours falls apart." Elena stood up. She walked to the window. She looked out at the city. The lights of it, the density of it, a million lives proceeding in every direction, and none of them knowing that in this room on the 10th floor of a building on North Dearborn, the entire architecture of her survival was being disassembled piece by piece. She had no home. She had a father facing fabricated criminal charges. She had an attorney being publicly discredited. She had a dossier in enemy hands containing her most private wounds. She had a document she'd signed that could be used to paint her as complicit in fraud. And she had a man who'd helped her, whose help was now the weapon aimed at her. Marcus had not missed a single angle. 7 years of watching her, and he'd missed nothing. She turned around. Vivian and Dante were both looking at her, waiting, she understood, to see what kind of person she was when everything was gone. When there was nothing left to protect and nothing left to lose, and the choice was between retreating into whatever safety remained, which was very little, or doing the thing that frightened her more than any of the rest of it, she looked at Dante. "The federal investigation. Your contact there. Can you use it?" He frowned slightly. "Use it how? You said you had a contact at the federal level, dormant. If you activate that contact, if you go to them directly, what happens to the investigation against you?" "It depends on what I bring them," he said slowly. "What if you brought them everything?" Elena said. "Not just the financial records on Marcus. You, your operation, full cooperation. You give them Marcus and you give them yourself." The room went very quiet. Dante looked at her for a long time. "That's not a small thing you're asking," he said. "I know what I'm asking," Elena said. "I'm asking if you're willing to burn your own operation to the ground to end this." She held his gaze. "Because Marcus is betting that you're not. He's betting that you have too much to lose on your own side to go all the way. He's betting that everyone in this room has something they won't sacrifice." She paused. Are you willing to burn your own operation to the ground to end this?" The sentence hung in the room like smoke. Dante didn't answer immediately. He stood up from the chair, not agitated, not pacing, just standing, because the weight of what she'd asked required him to be vertical. He walked to the window and stood beside Elena and looked out at the same city she'd been looking at, the same lights, the same density of lives proceeding in every direction. Vivian didn't move, didn't speak. She understood, with the instinct of a woman who'd sat in rooms where large decisions got made, that this moment didn't belong to her. 14 months, Dante said finally, not to Elena, to the window. "I built something that took 14 months. People I work with, they trusted me with decisions. Some of them are going to face consequences if I cooperate fully. I know, Elena said. I'm not saying no. He turned and looked at her. I'm saying I need you to understand what you're asking. It's not just me burning, it's people connected to me. And my father is 71 years old and facing handcuffs on charges your target manufactured, Elena said. Her voice was even. Not cold, but stripped of everything that wasn't necessary. I understand the cost on your side. I'm asking you to weigh it. Dante looked at her for a long moment. His jaw shifted. Something moved behind his eyes, like, not calculation, she thought. Something that had already finished calculating and arrived somewhere harder. I'll make the call, he said. Yes. The contact's name was Agent Carol Huang. She'd been with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division for 11 years, and she met Dante at 6 in the morning in a parking structure on West Monroe with 2 other agents and a recorder and the particular controlled energy of someone who has been waiting for a phone to ring for a long time. Elena wasn't there for the meeting. Dante had been clear about that. She needed separation, needed her involvement to remain in the civil and personal lane rather than the federal criminal lane, needed the distance. Vivian had agreed. Elena had not been happy about it, but she understood the architecture. She waited in the apartment with Vivian and a coffee she didn't drink, and the dossier open on the table in front of her, going through it page by page the way you go through something terrible. Not because it feels good, but because understanding it completely is the only thing that gives you any power over it. The therapy notes. She read them for the first time since writing them. Her own handwriting, looping and slightly cramped the way it always was when she was tired, which she had been constantly in 2019. She read what she'd written about Marcus, and she read it not as the woman who'd been trying to explain herself to a therapist, but as a reader encountering a document for the first time, and what she read was systematic, consistent, detailed in the way that people are detailed when they're trying to make sense of something that doesn't make sense. It was, she realized, a record, an unintentional, thoroughly documented record of a pattern of behavior that had a clinical name and a legal definition, and had been happening to her for years before she'd had the language for it. Vivian, she said. Vivian looked up from her laptop. The therapy notes, Elena said. Marcus wants to use them as evidence of instability, but they're also evidence of the abuse. She turned the pages toward her. Everything I wrote about is in here. The financial control, the isolation, the way he managed my access to information and people, the miscarriage and his response to it. She looked at Vivian. Can we use them first? Vivian was quiet for a moment. Her eyes moved across the pages. The rapid calculation of someone running variables in real time. It's risky, she said. You're introducing private mental health records into a public proceeding. It opens the door to cross-examination on your psychological state. Let them cross-examine me, Elena said. Let them put me on the stand and try to argue that the woman who wrote these notes was unstable. Let a jury read them. She paused. Marcus built a weapon out of my most vulnerable moments. I'm going to pick that weapon up and swing it back. Vivian looked at her for 3 full seconds. Then she wrote something on the legal pad and said, We'd need your consent formally documented, and we'd need to move before Marcus files a motion to introduce them on his terms. Get the paperwork, Elena said. I'll sign it today. Chad. Dante came back at 9:15. He came through the door and sat down on the couch without taking his coat off, and he looked tired in a way that was different from exhaustion. Tired like something had been resolved and resolution had its own weight. She took the meeting, he said. All of it. 14 months of financials. The shell structures, the Southside development, the alderman, the judge. Full cooperation agreement in exchange for consideration on my existing exposure. He paused. It's not immunity. I'm going to face things. My attorneys will manage what they can. But the federal investigation pivots, from me to Marcus. He looked at Elena. Huang is moving today. They're opening a parallel investigation using our documentation as the basis for a legitimate search. By tonight, there should be subpoenas on Marcus's primary business accounts. Elena felt something shift in her chest. Not relief. Not yet. Relief required feeling safe, and she was nowhere near safe. But something tectonic, something that had been pressing in one direction for a very long time, beginning, incrementally, to move. My father, she said. Huang is also looking at the Raymond files. The metadata, the account structures, The digital signature spoofing. She's seen manufactured evidence before. She knows what it looks like. He met her eyes. She thinks the charges collapse within 72 hours if we give her the technical documentation showing the records were fabricated. Can we get that documentation? Vivian's already on it, Dante said. There's a forensic accountant she uses. He's been on the Raymond records since last night. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. Elena, this is moving fast now. When it moves, Marcus is going to know it's moving. He has people in enough places that he'll feel the subpoenas before they're fully served. When he does, he'll act, she said, before he loses the ability to. Yes. What does that look like? Dante was quiet for a moment. In my experience, when a man like Marcus feels the walls starting to come in, he does one of two things. He negotiates, offers something to make it stop, tries to find the exit that costs him the least, or he burns everything in reach. He looked at her directly. Marcus doesn't negotiate. I've watched him for 14 months. He's not built for it. His entire psychology is domination or destruction. There's no middle setting. Elena thought about the flat brown eyes. The patience of him. The absence of rage even when he was doing terrible things, because rage implied the other person had the power to affect you, and Marcus never granted anyone that power. He'll go for my father again, she said. Or he'll go for you. Or he'll go for Vivian. Probably all three, Dante said, simultaneously. He'll try to collapse enough of our structure that something critical fails before we can complete what we're building. He paused. Which means we need to move first. Before he knows we're ready. Before he has time to... His phone went off. He looked at it. His expression shifted. A quick contraction around the eyes, there and gone. What? Elena said. Patricia Hale, he said. She's gone. Elena stood up. What do you mean gone? Her apartment. She's not there. Her phone is going to voicemail. He was already standing, already moving. Someone got to her. Tit. Patricia Hale lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Pilsen that she'd moved into after leaving Marcus's employment. A deliberate choice of distance. South Side, different neighborhood, different rhythm, as far from the Voss orbit as you could get while still being in Chicago. Vivian knew the address. They were there in 18 minutes. The apartment door was unlocked, not broken, unlocked. The kind of thing that meant Patricia had left voluntarily or been convinced to leave in a hurry. Her coat was gone. Her phone was on the kitchen counter. Her laptop was open, screen dark. And when Vivian touched the trackpad, it woke up to an email draft, unsent, addressed to a journalist at the Tribune. Elena read it over Vivian's shoulder. It was 3 paragraphs, direct and specific in the way of a person who had decided to stop being careful. It named Marcus. It named dates. It named a specific incident in a conference room on the 14th floor of the Voss Development headquarters. It had been started at 11:15 the previous night, just after their conversation. Patricia had written it and not sent it and left it open on her laptop when she left. She was scared, Elena said. She wrote it, and then she got scared and ran. Or someone called her, Vivian said, and she ran because of what they said. Can we find her? We can try. Vivian photographed the screen with her phone. But she's a witness we no longer control, and if Marcus has people looking for her too... A sound from the hallway. All 3 of them turned. A man in the doorway. Not a threat. Mid-50s, soft around the middle, the slightly harassed look of a building superintendent who'd been asked to check on a tenant and arrived to find the apartment full of strangers. Who are you people? He said. We're trying to find Patricia, Vivian said evenly. So's someone else, the super said. Man was up here an hour ago asking about her. Didn't look friendly. Elena looked at Dante. Description, Dante said. The super gave one. Dante's jaw tightened slightly. A recognition he didn't share out loud, not in front of the super. Elena filed the reaction. They left. On the stairs, she grabbed Dante's arm. You knew him. He works for a private security firm Marcus uses, Dante said. I've seen him twice in the last year in places connected to Voss's business. He didn't slow down. They found her before we could, which means they were watching her longer than we were. They hit the street. Chicago morning, gray and cold, a wind off the lake that cut straight through. Elena stood on the sidewalk and thought fast. The way she'd learned to think in the last 72 hours, all the weight of 7 years of performed passivity suddenly converted into something functional and fierce. She sent it, Elena said. Vivian looked at her. Vivian looked at Yam. She didn't send the email, but that doesn't mean she stayed silent. Elena pulled out her phone. Patricia talked to us for 2 hours. Before that email draft, before she ran, she talked to us. Vivian, you recorded it. The recording is 3 hours of audio, Vivian said slowly. Some of it she explicitly said she wasn't ready to have public. Call her, Elena said. Find her. Tell her what's happening and ask her directly if she'll let us use it. She looked at Vivian steadily. Don't make the decision for her. Ask her, but find her first. Vivian was already pulling up contacts, moving toward the car. Elena turned to Dante. The judge, Cook County, the one Marcus has in his pocket. Hargrove, Dante said. How much do we have on him? Enough for Huang, Dante said. Enough to make him very uncomfortable. Can she move on him today? I can ask. Ask, Elena said. Because if Marcus gets to a judge before we do, he can freeze the subpoenas, he can delay the financial investigation, he can buy himself a week, and a week is enough for him to bury my father. Dante looked at her. The wind hit them both, hard and cold. His hair moved. A muscle worked in his jaw. You understand what happens if Huang moves on Hargrove too fast, he said. If she tips her hand before everything is in place. I understand the risk, Elena said. Make the call. He held her gaze for one more second, then he put the phone to his ear. The press conference Marcus called was at 2 in the afternoon. The Voss Development boardroom, 36th floor, with a view of the lake behind him and 3 attorneys flanking him, and a statement prepared by people who were very good at making terrible things sound reasonable. Elena watched it on her phone from the back of Vivian's car, parked outside the courthouse where Richard Paulson was in a room with Raymond's attorney and 2 federal agents who were, according to Vivian's last update, finding the fabricated records considerably less defensible under forensic scrutiny than Marcus had presumably hoped. On screen, Marcus stood at a podium looking the way he always looked, contained, certain, the architecture of confidence so thoroughly built into his posture that it was almost impossible to see it as construction rather than nature. I want to address the situation involving my wife with the directness and care that she deserves, he said. He had his concerned husband face on. Elena had seen it before, deployed at parties when someone asked after her, deployed when her father called and Marcus answered the phone, a face she had once believed. Elena is experiencing a significant mental health crisis that has been developing for some time. I have been working, privately, to support her through this. I had hoped she would accept the help I arranged. I remain hopeful. A reporter called out, Mr. Voss, regarding the federal, I will not be taking questions today, Marcus said. Smooth, patient. I am focused on my wife's well-being. I ask that the press extend to our family the privacy it deserves during a painful time. He stepped back from the podium before anyone could push further. Elena looked at the screen, at the performed concern on his face, at the careful use of privacy and family and well-being, words that had been selected by professionals to activate specific emotional responses in people who didn't know him. She turned the phone off. Vivian, she said. Vivian beside her was typing. I'm watching it. Patricia, I found her, Vivian said. Her voice was different, controlled but carrying something beneath the control. She's at a friend's apartment in Rogers Park. I reached her 20 minutes ago. A pause. She'll do it. She wants to. She said, Vivian stopped typing. She said she's been waiting for someone to go first, that she'd be right behind. Elena closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Let that land. Then, what do we have right now? Everything. Lay it out. Vivian turned in the seat to face her. Patricia Hale, audio-recorded testimony, willing to appear publicly. Financial forensics on the Raymond fabrication, 70% complete, enough for Huang to challenge the charges. Dante's financial documentation now in federal hands, triggering a legitimate investigation. Subpoenas on 3 of Marcus's primary business accounts, served within the last hour. She paused. Judge Hargrove received a visit from 2 federal agents 45 minutes ago. He has not, as of yet, taken any action to interfere with the investigation. And the dossier, Elena said, the one Marcus built on me. We filed a motion documenting the illegally obtained private records. The therapy notes we're introducing on our own terms before he can. Medical records from the miscarriage are included as evidence of emotional harm during the marriage. Vivian's voice was steady. The document you signed, the fraudulent transfer. I've built a case around the pattern of signature misuse. 7 instances total where your signature appears on documents you had no meaningful understanding of. That's not complicity. That's a pattern of predatory manipulation. Elena nodded, taking it in, holding it. There's one thing left, she said. Vivian waited. Marcus gave that statement 20 minutes ago. He still thinks he controls this. He thinks he's managing the timing. Elena looked out the window at the courthouse steps, at the ordinary people going in and out with their ordinary legal problems. A city full of people navigating systems that were supposed to be neutral, and sometimes were. He needs to know he's lost before he tries something worse. Elena, not a statement, not a press conference. She looked at Vivian. I need to talk to him directly. One conversation, in person. That is a terrible idea, Vivian said immediately. I know. He will use anything you say. He will record it. He will... I know. Elena looked at her. Set it up. Neutral ground, public location, both of us know it's being recorded. Tell his attorneys. Full transparency. She paused. He'll agree, because his attorneys will tell him it's an opportunity, and because Marcus has never been able to resist the chance to look me in the face and feel like he's winning. Vivian stared at her for a long moment. You're going to tell him what we have, Vivian said slowly. I'm going to show him what he's already lost, Elena said, and I'm going to give him one chance to make this easier on himself. Not because I'm feeling generous, because if he panics and destroys evidence before the federal subpoenas are fully executed, we lose things we need. And if he doesn't take the chance, then he doesn't, Elena said, and we bury him anyway. The hotel bar was on the lobby level of the Langham, neutral in the way that expensive places are neutral. Too polished for anyone to feel entirely at home, which made it even ground. Elena arrived first. She sat at a corner table with a clear sightline to the entrance and an exit behind her and a water glass she didn't touch. And she sat with her hands flat on the table and her breathing slow and her mind very quiet, in the way it went quiet now when things were at their most serious. She dressed carefully. Not armor, not the performing wife gown of the anniversary party. Dark jeans, a clean blazer, her own hair. Herself, as close to herself as she'd been in years. Marcus arrived 8 minutes late. His 2 attorneys waited near the entrance. He'd come alone to the table, which surprised her until she understood it didn't. This was personal. Whatever else it was, this was personal, and Marcus didn't share personal things. He sat down across from her and looked at her with those flat brown eyes, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. You've been busy, he said finally. Yes, she said. You have help. Yes. Moretti. Not a question. His jaw shifted. The one tell he had. That small movement. You know what he is? I know exactly what he is, Elena said. I also know what you are, and right now the federal government is learning it too. She kept her voice even, conversational. Your primary accounts have been subpoenaed. Your financial structures in the South Side development are being mapped by people who know how to read them. Judge Hargrove had a visit this morning that he found very uncomfortable. She paused. The Raymond case falls apart in 48 hours. The forensics are already done. Marcus was very still. Patricia Hale is going to speak publicly, Elena continued. Tomorrow, I expect. There are 2 other women behind her. And I'm going to take the witness stand and I am going to present 7 years of documented evidence of financial abuse, psychological manipulation, and systematic isolation. I am going to present the therapy notes you surveilled and the documents you had me sign under false pretenses and the dossier you built on my most private moments. She looked at him steadily. I'm giving you this information because your attorneys deserve to know what's coming. I'm giving you one opportunity to consider an alternative to the next 12 months of your life. Marcus looked at her for a long time. The controlled face, the patient eyes. You think you've won something, he said. I think I've built something, she said, which is different. Something moved in his face. Barely. But she'd spent 7 years learning to read the barely visible things in Marcus Voss's face, And what moved there was not the thing she'd expected, not anger, not calculation. It was recognition, cold and involuntary and immediately suppressed. He looked at her like he was seeing her clearly for the first time. Not the version he'd built and managed, the actual woman. "You would have been remarkable," he said quietly, almost to himself. Elena felt the words land, felt the old familiar gravity of his regard, the particular power of having the attention of a person who'd controlled your world for years. She let it pass through her without taking hold, like weather. "I am remarkable," she said. "That's not past tense." Marcus's jaw tightened, then his phone went off. He looked at it. Something changed in his face immediately, a fast, sharp change, the first genuinely uncontrolled expression she'd seen on him. His eyes went to her face, back to the phone. "What is this?" he said. She looked at the phone, a notification visible from across the table, a news alert. She recognized the headline because Vivian had told her it was coming, had told her the journalist had the story and was filing it tonight. She'd thought tonight meant evening. Apparently tonight meant now. Exclusive. Former Voss development employees detail pattern of harassment, coercion, financial crimes. Whistleblowers speak on record for the first time. Patricia had called the journalist directly. Hadn't waited for tomorrow. Hadn't waited for anyone. Had just gone first. Marcus stood up from the table. The movement was fast, faster than she'd ever seen him move. Controlled speed rather than agitation. A man shifting from one mode to another. He looked at Elena, and the flat brown eyes were not flat anymore. They were something she'd never seen in them before in 7 years of marriage. "You have no idea," he said, "what you've started." His voice was very quiet, very precise. And under the precision was something that made the hairs on Elena's arms stand up. Not fear of him, but recognition of it. The sound of a man who has realized he has nothing left to protect and is deciding in real time whether to negotiate or to burn. She held his gaze. "Yes, I do," she said. He turned and walked to his attorneys by the entrance. She watched him say something to them in a low voice. Watched one of the attorneys pull out a phone. Watched Marcus's face in profile. The jaw, the controlled breathing, the movement behind the eyes of a man calculating at speed. Then Marcus Voss looked back at her across the lobby of the Langham Hotel. And for the first time in 7 years, Elena didn't look away first. His attorney touched his arm, said something. Marcus turned back and the three of them moved toward the exit, and then they were gone, through the revolving door, into the Chicago afternoon. Elena sat alone at the corner table with her water glass in her flat hands, and the noise of the bar resuming around her like a tide coming back in. Her heart was hammering. She noted that. The body keeping its own account. She'd been steady and clear through the whole conversation, and her heart had hammered through every second of it. Her phone lit up on the table. "Vivian," she answered. "He's moving," Vivian said. No preamble. His attorneys just filed an emergency motion in Cook County. They're trying to get a judge to freeze Huang's subpoenas on procedural grounds before end of business today. A pause. "Hargrove isn't the judge on the motion. Someone else on the roster. Someone we don't have information on. Can Huang counter it? She's trying, but if the freeze goes through, even temporarily, how long would it take? The hearing is in 40 minutes. Elena was already standing. Where? Daly Center, courtroom 1703. Elena was moving toward the exit before Vivian finished saying it, through the revolving door and into the cold Chicago afternoon, wind off the lake hitting her full in the face, and she was running now. Not metaphorically, actually running, heels on the wet sidewalk, her blazer open, and the cold tearing through it, running toward a courthouse 40 minutes away. And 40 minutes, that might be the difference between everything holding together, and she made it to Daly Center in 31 minutes, not running the whole way. She'd flagged a cab on Wabash and sat in the back seat with her hands pressed flat on her thighs and her breathing deliberate, the way you breathe when panic is available and you're choosing not to use it. The driver said something about traffic. Elena didn't hear it. She was watching the clock on her phone and doing the arithmetic of it, the cold calculation of whether 31 minutes was enough or whether the thing she'd built over the past 72 hours was about to get dismantled in a courtroom she hadn't known existed an hour ago. Vivian was on the steps when the cab pulled up. Not pacing, standing very still with her phone to her ear and her other hand in a fist at her side, which Elena had learned was Vivian's version of pacing. He withdrew it, Vivian said, the moment Elena reached her. Elena stopped. What? 20 minutes ago. Marcus's attorneys filed a withdrawal of the emergency motion. Vivian lowered the phone. Her expression was not relief exactly. It was the controlled version of relief, the face of someone who knows that one threat receding doesn't mean the war is over. I don't know why. Huang thinks Marcus got counsel that told him the motion would backfire, drawing attention to the subpoenas in open court, creating a public record of his attempt to interfere. She paused. Or he made a strategic decision to abandon the legal interference and move to something else. Something else, Elena said. I don't know what yet. Vivian looked at her. But Marcus Voss doesn't withdraw from anything without a reason. He doesn't retreat. He redirects. Elena stood on the courthouse steps in the cold and thought about the look on his face in the Langham bar. The look that had come after the news alert, not anger, not the controlled patience she'd lived alongside for 7 years. Something rawer than either. The look of a man whose calculation had hit an answer he hadn't prepared for. Where is he now? She said. His attorney's office as of 40 minutes ago. Vivian pocketed her phone. Huang has people watching. If he moves in any direction that touches the financial investigation, she'll know. A pause. The Raymond case, the forensics came back. Full report. The fabrication is comprehensive, but it cracked under scrutiny. Metadata inconsistencies, software fingerprints that don't match Raymond's firm's systems, transaction timestamps that contradict server logs from the actual firm. Vivian looked at her steadily. The charges against your father collapse. His attorney is filing the motion this afternoon. Raymond should be clear by tomorrow morning. Elena heard it, held it for a moment without moving. Her father, his kitchen. The dried tracks of tears on his face, and the way he'd straightened up when she came in because he was still, even frightened in 71, trying to be her father. Okay, she said. Her voice came out slightly uneven. The first time in 3 days. She pressed her lips together and got it back. Okay, what's left? Patricia's story broke an hour ago, Vivian said. It's everywhere. 2 other women have already contacted the journalist directly. Not through us, on their own. Marcus's communications director resigned 20 minutes after the story published. 3 board members of Voss Development have issued statements saying they're reviewing their positions. She paused. The ground is moving under him. He knows it. Elena looked up at the Daily Center, the massive brutalist face of it, the Alexander Calder sculpture in the plaza catching the gray afternoon light. This city that had been Marcus's city, his constructed domain, and was now... She could feel it shifting, could feel the weight of it redistributing, becoming something else. Contested ground. Real. I need to call my father, she said. Go, Vivian said. I'll be here. Raymond answered on the first ring, which meant he'd been waiting. Elena stood at the edge of the plaza with the wind hitting her back and told him what Vivian had told her, precisely and without softening, because her father was not a man who needed softening. He was a man who needed accuracy. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. My attorney called 20 minutes ago, he said. He told me roughly the same thing. Another pause. I've been sitting in my kitchen. I know. I planted the winter garlic yesterday morning, he said, before those men came. I was in the garden, and then I came inside, and they were at the door. His voice was steady, but she could hear what was underneath it. The particular exhaustion of a person who has spent 36 hours being afraid and is now releasing the fear slowly, like pressure from a valve. I kept thinking about the garlic, whether I'd covered it right. Elena almost smiled. Almost. Did you? I think so, he said. I'll check tomorrow. She stood there in the wind, phone to her ear, and let herself feel it. Not all of it. Not the full accumulated weight of the past 72 hours and the 7 years before them. Just this. Her father in his kitchen thinking about his garden. The ordinary, irreplaceable texture of a life that was going to continue. I'm sorry, she said. For all of it. For how long it took me. Ellie, his voice was quiet. You don't have that debt with me. You never did. She didn't say anything for a moment. Come for dinner on Sunday, he said. I'll make something. Bring whoever you want. She said she would. She hung up and stood in the plaza for another 30 seconds, with her eyes on the middle distance, doing the work of not crying in front of the Daily Center, which felt like exactly the wrong place for it. Then she put her phone in her pocket and went back to Vivian. The trial, when it came, was not quick. It took 7 months from the filing of federal charges to the start of testimony. 7 months of motions and countermotions, of Marcus's legal team throwing procedural weight at every angle, of press conferences and leaked documents and a media cycle that churned the story every time it threatened to go quiet. 7 months of Elena living in a careful, reduced life, the North Dearborn apartment, then a place of her own in Lincoln Square that she found herself and signed the lease on herself and paid for herself from the settlement funds that Vivian extracted from the civil case, which was moving on a parallel track to the criminal one. 7 months of learning to sleep through the night again. Of calling Sandra, who had flown in from Seattle within 4 days of the first press conference, and sat with Elena in the Lincoln Square apartment eating delivery food and talking for 6 hours straight about everything they'd missed in the years Marcus had quietly made it inconvenient to be close. 7 months of Sunday dinners in Oak Park, which became the fixed point around which the variable weeks organized themselves. 7 months of Dante Moretti navigating his own legal exposure with the particular grim efficiency of a man who had made a calculation and was living with its full cost. His cooperation with federal investigators was genuine and thorough. It cost him. 2 of the businesses closed. One of the men in his organization faced charges that Dante's attorneys argued down but couldn't eliminate. Dante himself entered a deferred prosecution agreement, not immunity, as he'd said, not clean, but a structure that kept him functional if he stayed on the right side of lines he'd spent his adult life moving around. Elena didn't know all the details. She knew enough. He came to Sunday dinners sometimes. Not always. Enough that Raymond had stopped giving him the careful, measuring look he'd been giving him initially and started just handing him a plate. They did not have the kind of relationship that had a clean, simple name. What they had was something that had grown in strange conditions, pressure and proximity, and the specific honesty of people who had seen each other at their most stripped down and kept showing up anyway. Some evenings they sat in her apartment and talked for 3 hours, and he left at midnight, and neither of them pushed it further than that. Some evenings she felt the exact shape of what was between them, and it frightened her in a way that was entirely different from the kind of fear she'd spent 7 years living inside, because this one was about something she might actually want. She was not ready for it yet. She knew that. And Dante, whatever else he was, understood timing in the way of someone who had spent a long time learning to wait. The courtroom on the first day of trial was packed. Elena sat in the gallery with Vivian and Richard and watched the proceedings with the focused attention of someone who had put everything they had into what was happening in that room and was now at the mercy of whether it held. Federal prosecutor, 41, former public defender, a woman with the kind of courtroom presence that came from years of fighting uphill. Marcus's defense team, 3 senior partners and 2 associates, suits that cost more than most people's monthly income, the architecture of certainty. And Marcus at the defense table, looking the way he always looked, contained, certain, dressed in the quiet authority of a man who had spent 30 years constructing a self that would hold under scrutiny. She watched him sit down, watched him arrange his papers, watched him speak briefly to his lead attorney with the calm of a person conducting a business meeting. She thought about the man she had married, the version of him that had existed, briefly and possibly genuinely, in the early years, or perhaps more accurately, the version of him she had believed in during the early years, which was not the same thing. She thought about 27-year-old Elena in the Wicker Park apartment, working 60-hour weeks and arguing with clients and staying up too late, and the particular hunger she'd had then for certainty, for someone who knew what they wanted and moved toward it without second-guessing. She had confused that hunger for love. She had confused his certainty for safety. She had spent 7 years paying the cost of those confusions. She did not hate him. That surprised her still, sometimes, at odd moments. The absence of hatred. What she felt toward Marcus Voss was something cooler and more complete than hate. She felt the precise, unambiguous clarity of a person who has finally seen a thing for exactly what it is and cannot be made to unsee it. That clarity did not require hatred. It required only that she stay in her seat and let the truth be spoken and trust that the structure they'd built would hold. Patricia Hale took the stand on the fourth day of testimony. She wore a dark blue suit and her hair pulled back, and she sat in the witness chair with the careful posture of someone who has been frightened for a long time and has decided, with deliberate effort, to stop letting the fear govern her body. Elena watched her from the gallery and felt something she couldn't fully name, kinship maybe, the specific recognition of a woman watching another woman do the thing that costs the most. Patricia's testimony was 2 hours. She spoke in full sentences. She did not cry, though there were moments where the effort of not crying was visible in her face, a tightness around the jaw, a particular steadiness of focus that was its own kind of bravery. She detailed 5 specific incidents. She named dates and locations and words that Marcus had said. She described what happened after, the legal machinery that had descended on her when she'd tried to report, the document she'd signed under pressure in a conference room with 2 attorneys present and no one on her side. Marcus's defense attorney cross-examined her for 90 minutes. Implied motive, implied fabrication, implied instability. Patricia answered each question directly and did not get angry and did not get rattled, and at the end of it, she was exactly where she'd been at the start. Credible, clear, and present. 2 other women testified in the following 2 days. Their stories were different in detail and consistent in pattern. The pattern was the thing. Patterns were what prosecutors loved and what defense teams feared most, because a pattern transformed isolated incidents into evidence of a method, a deliberate and repeated exercise of power against people who didn't have the resources to resist. The financial testimony came after. Forensic accountants, federal investigators, a former business partner who had been, in Dante's phrase, persuaded to cooperate, a man named Gerald Fitch, who had spent 3 years in Marcus's orbit before extracting himself, and who described in careful technical language the structure of the shell accounts and the redirected Southside housing funds and the flow of money between Marcus's legitimate and illegitimate operations with the defeated precision of someone testifying about their own bad choices as much as someone else's. Elena had reviewed all of this testimony in preparation with Vivian. She knew the shape of it, but hearing it in the courtroom, hearing the pieces assembled in sequence, watching the architecture of Marcus's corruption rendered in public language in front of a jury of 12 people who had no stake in protecting anyone, it was different from knowing. It was the difference between understanding something intellectually and feeling it in your body as true. She took the stand on a Thursday. She'd slept 6 hours the night before, which was better than she'd expected. She'd eaten breakfast, toast, fruit, the practical fuel of it. She'd dressed in the same gray she'd worn to the first press conference, because gray still felt right, still felt like the color of a person becoming something rather than someone who had already arrived. The prosecutor walked her through the chronology, the marriage, the early years, the systematic dismantling of financial independence. She answered each question with the precision she and Vivian had practiced, and the authenticity that couldn't be practiced, because the events were real, and they lived in her body, and no amount of preparation could make them not real. But preparation meant she didn't get lost in them, didn't drown, kept the thread of her own voice through every dark room of the past 7 years. She talked about the miscarriage. Her voice stayed level. She could feel the jury, couldn't look at them directly, but could feel the quality of attention in the room changing, the particular density of silence that gathers when people are genuinely listening. She talked about the documents she'd signed. The attorney explained their significance, and she described the circumstances of each signing, the timing, what Marcus had told her, what she'd believed. She talked about the years of small corrections and the isolation and the way a life could be taken apart piece by piece so slowly that you didn't feel each individual piece leaving until you found yourself one night in a hotel bathroom with no coat and no phone and nowhere to go. The defense cross-examination took 4 hours. They tried the mental health angle. She answered steadily. They tried the document, the fraudulent transfer, her signature. She described the circumstances with Vivian's framing. 7 documented instances of her signature being obtained under false pretenses, establishing a pattern of manipulation rather than complicity. They tried Patricia Hale, suggested Elena had coordinated the witnesses, manufactured a narrative. Elena said that the women had come forward independently and that the consistency of the accounts was not the product of coordination, but of Marcus's consistent behavior. They tried finally Dante Moretti. Isn't it true, the defense attorney said, standing very still in front of the witness box, that during the period you claim to have been rebuilding your life independently, you were in fact sheltered and supported by a known organized crime figure? Elena looked at him. I was helped by a person who provided me shelter for 3 nights when I had nowhere to go. That person subsequently cooperated fully with federal investigators and provided evidence that helped build this case. She paused. I was also helped by my attorney, my father, my college roommate, 3 women I'd never met who had the courage to speak, and a forensic accountant who worked 40 hours straight on fabricated evidence. You're welcome to characterize any of them, however serves your purposes. A sound moved through the courtroom. Not laughter. Something smaller and more involuntary than that. The defense attorney moved on. The jury deliberated for 11 hours over 2 days. Elena spent those hours in various states of enforced normality. Coffee with Vivian, a long walk along the lake with Sandra, a Sunday dinner at her father's where Raymond made pasta, and they talked about everything except the trial with the specific determined normalcy of people refusing to let waiting swallow them whole. She slept badly both nights and didn't pretend otherwise. And when the call came on the second afternoon, she was sitting at her own kitchen table in Lincoln Square with her hands wrapped around a mug going cold, and she answered the phone, and Vivian said the 2 words, and Elena sat very still for a long moment and then said, okay, and hung up. Guilty. All counts. She'd known it was the likely outcome. The evidence had been overwhelming by any honest measure. And still, the word landed in her body like something physical. Not triumph, not the exhilaration she might have expected, but something quieter and more complicated. The quiet of a weight finally set down. The body taking a breath it had been withholding for a long time. She sat at the kitchen table for another 10 minutes, not doing anything. The afternoon light came through the window and moved across the floor in the slow way it did at this time of year. Low angle, pale gold, the particular light of late autumn in a city that would go gray soon and stay gray for months. She sat in it and let it be what it was. Then she got up and called her father. The sentencing hearing was 3 weeks later. 32 years, federal guidelines. Marcus stood when the judge read it, and he looked the way he'd always looked. And that was the thing Elena took with her when she left the courthouse. Not satisfaction, not grief, but the strange finality of watching a man receive the consequence of being exactly what he was. He hadn't broken down. He hadn't performed remorse. He'd stood and absorbed the sentence with the same controlled certainty that had been his defining feature for 30 years. And she thought that was, in its way, the most accurate ending for him. He would carry himself into whatever came next the same way he'd carried himself through everything. Certain that he was the most important person in any room, certain that the story was primarily his. The story was not primarily his. She walked out of the courthouse into a November afternoon, cold and clear for once. The sky a hard, specific blue. Vivian was beside her. Richard was behind her. Her father, who had come for the sentencing, was on her left, walking carefully on his bad hip. At the bottom of the steps, Dante was waiting. He stood with his hands in the pockets of his dark coat, and when she came down the steps, he looked at her with those gray-green eyes and didn't say anything immediately, didn't move toward her, just waited, the way he'd always waited, with the patience of someone who understood that things arrived in their own time and pushing them didn't make them come faster. "Hey," she said. "Hey," he said. She stood in front of him on the sidewalk with the November air between them and the city going on in every direction and the weight of the past 8 months behind her like a country she'd crossed on foot. "How do you feel?" he said. Not performing the question, actually asking. She thought about it. "Like I've been carrying something for a very long time, and I just put it down and my arms don't know what to do with themselves yet." He nodded. That slight shift in his expression, the thing adjacent to a smile that was as close as he generally got. "What happens now?" he said. "I don't know yet," she said. That's the first honest answer I've given to that question in 7 years. She looked at him. "What happens with you?" "The deferred prosecution runs 18 months. Clean. My attorneys think it holds." He paused. The South Side development. I'm working with the city on a restoration of the original project. The families who were displaced. It'll take 2 years, maybe 3. There's a non-profit structure involved. A beat. It's slower work than I'm used to, less... He seemed to look for the word decisive. Is that hard? Yes, he said. It's also better, I think. He said it like someone who was still arriving at the conclusion, not someone who'd already made peace with it. She looked at him for a moment longer, at the jaw and the eyes and the weight he carried, the specific gravity of a man who had done damage in his life and was doing the difficult arithmetic of amends without pretending the math came out clean. She recognized it. She was doing her own version of the same arithmetic. My father wants to know if you're coming Sunday, she said. Something shifted in his face. The actual smile this time, brief and slightly crooked. Yeah, he said. I'll be there. The foundation took another 6 months to build properly. Vivian was on the board. Sandra joined remotely from Seattle and flew in for the launch. Patricia Hale became the first director of the legal services arm. Her particular understanding of what it meant to be in a room without anyone on your side giving her an authority in that role that no credential could have provided. Elena had asked her directly, standing in a coffee shop in Pilsen near Patricia's apartment, and Patricia had looked at her for a long moment and said yes in the quiet voice of someone who had found, after a long time in the dark, a room with a door that opened from the inside. They called it Open Door. Not for the metaphor of it. Elena was skeptical of organizational metaphors. But because the thing it actually did was practical, it opened doors. Legal aid for women with no money navigating systems designed to favor people with money. Housing resources for women who had nowhere to go at 2 a.m. in a rainstorm. Financial counseling for women whose independence had been systematically dismantled and who needed, at the most basic level, someone to sit with them and explain what they actually had and what they could actually do with it. The first year, they served 240 women in the Chicago metro area. The second year, 490. Elena went to the office most days, not the corner office. She'd given that to Patricia. She worked from a desk in the main room, near the door, where she could see people come in and see the look on their faces when they crossed the threshold, that particular mixture of terror and exhaustion and the very small hope that they'd managed to keep alive under everything. She recognized the look. She knew it from the inside. On the second anniversary of the sentencing, she stood in a conference room in the Foundation's offices on the north side and looked out at 30 women who were there for a workshop on financial independence. Various ages, various circumstances, various points in the long, difficult work of rebuilding. Some of them had been in the system for months. Some of them were new, still carrying the tightness of the first weeks, the wariness of people who'd been burned by kindness before and weren't sure yet whether this was different. She told them her story. Not everything, not every detail. She'd learned the discipline of what to include and what to leave in private, the understanding that a story offered in service of someone else had to be shaped for them, not therapeutic catharsis for the teller. She told them what mattered: the necklace, the sidewalk, the diner, the long, slow work of understanding what had been done to her, and then the longer, harder work of doing something about it. She told them that the doing something part had required help. People with specific skills, specific courage, specific willingness to stand in the fire. She'd had that help, and she knew not everyone did, and that was why the room existed. She told them that the hardest thing she'd done in the past 3 years was not the courtroom, not the testimony, not the months of legal process, or the media, or the scrutiny, or the moments when Marcus's attorneys had put her most private wounds on a table in public and tried to weaponize them. The hardest thing had been learning to trust her own judgment again, after years of it being quietly, persistently told it was wrong, her opinions, her instincts, her sense of what was real. Learning to trust that the thing she perceived was actually there, that the experience she was having was actually happening, that she was not, in fact, unstable or insufficient or lucky to be managed by someone who knew better. She didn't say it as a lesson. She said it as something she was still working on, because the women in that room didn't need a person who'd arrived somewhere complete and was looking back down at them from the summit. They needed someone who was still climbing, still making mistakes, still waking up some mornings with the old familiar gravity and having to choose, deliberately and with effort, not to let it govern the day. When she finished, there was a quiet. Not uncomfortable. The quiet of a room where something real had been said, and people were holding it. Then a woman in the second row, young, maybe 25, with the particular careful stillness of someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible, raised her hand and asked, "Did you know it was going to work? When you walked out of that party? Did you know any of it was going to work?" Elena looked at her. "No," she said. "I had no idea. I had no phone, no money, no coat. I had a dress that was already ruined." She paused. "I had the decision. That was the only thing I had that was actually mine." The woman nodded slowly. Something moved in her face that Elena recognized. The incremental loosening of something held too long. "The decision was enough," Elena said. "It turned out to be the only thing that needed to be enough." She drove to Oak Park that Sunday, parked on the street in front of her father's house, and sat in the car for a moment looking at the kitchen window, lit up yellow in the early evening dark. The vegetable garden along the side of the house, dormant now in November. The winter garlic under the soil doing its slow work in the dark. The front door unlocked, as always. Dante's car was already parked ahead of hers on the street. She sat looking at it for a moment. The complicated, ordinary fact of it. Someone else's car, parked in front of her father's house, on a Sunday in November. She got out. Inside, she could hear voices before she reached the door. Her father and Dante in the kitchen. The sound of something cooking. Her father's laugh at something. A real laugh. The laugh she'd been hearing for 34 years. Uncomplicated and full. She stood on the front step for a moment with her hand on the door and let herself have the moment. Not perform it for anyone, not document it, not run it through the lens of everything it had cost to get here. Just have it. The yellow light in the window and the voices inside and the cold November air and the particular feeling of being about to go through a door that she was going through by her own choice. In a life that was hers, toward people who were there because she'd let them be. She pushed the door open and went in. Her father looked up from the stove. "You're late." "I'm exactly on time," she said. She hung up her coat. The kitchen smelled like garlic and something in a pan, and the old, warm smell of that house, unchanged for 30 years. "What are we making?" "Your father is making pasta," Dante said from the table, where he was sitting with a glass of water and the look of a man who had been told to sit down and stay out of the way. "I have been informed my contributions are not required in this kitchen." "He tried to fix the sauce," Raymond said with dignity. "It didn't need fixing." Elena sat down across from Dante at the kitchen table. He looked at her. The gray-green eyes, the broken and healed jaw, the weight he carried that she'd stopped trying to subtract from him because it was part of what he was, and she'd come to understand that accepting a person meant accepting the full accounting, not just the entries you preferred. "How was the workshop?" he said. "Good," she said. "Hard. Good." She put her hands flat on the table. "There was a woman there who reminded me of myself. About 3 years ago." "What did you tell her?" "The truth," Elena said, "which is all I've got." He looked at her for a moment. Then he reached across the table and put his hand over hers, briefly, and took it back. The simple weight of it. Not possession, not rescue. Just presence, offered without requirement, warm and real, and nothing more complicated than that. Her father put a bowl on the table and told them to eat while it was hot. Outside, Chicago went on in every direction. The lights of it. The density of lives proceeding in 1,000 different registers, some of them burning, and some of them healing, and most of them somewhere in the long, complicated middle where most lives actually live. The city that had taken her in on the worst night of her life and given her a cracked sidewalk and a diner with bad coffee and the particular darkness of a woman who had finally run out of ways to pretend. The woman in the midnight blue gown, barefoot in the rain, diamonds scattered across a ballroom floor. She was gone. In her place was someone who knew the weight of things and had chosen, again and again, to carry what was hers and put down what wasn't. Someone who had learned to distinguish between the two. Someone who had been saved by nothing except the decision, made once in the dark and then again every morning after, to keep going. Elena Hartwell picked up her fork and ate her dinner. The people she loved were around her. Outside it had started to rain.